Hello, I'm Ruth Crowell, Chief Executive for the LBMA, and I'm joined today by Diana Culillas, the Secretary General of the Swiss Better Gold Association. Hello, Diana. It's so nice to see you in person for a change due to the COVID pandemic.
Hello, Ruth. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure meeting you indeed physically after such a long time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me into the Swiss Better Gold offices. If nothing else, it's a good opportunity for me to try my work travel skills and see you all in person. I wanted to talk a little bit about what is Swiss Better Gold, what are the goals of your work, and who's really standing behind this.
Yeah, thank you. The Swiss Better Gold, the Swiss Better Gold Association is a non-profit association created back in 2013 by Swiss players of the gold industry involved in gold trade, purchasing, transformation, manufacturing, refiners, Swiss banks, and watch and jewelry brands. It has been created with the aim. The purpose was to support artisanal and small-scale gold mining. And for that specific role, we thought that as an industry association, certainly if we join forces with other institutions, other key players of the gold industry, we would certainly reach further. And this is why we partner with the Swiss State Secretariat for the Economic Affairs in what we call this Better Gold Initiative. So the Swiss Better Gold Initiative, it's our implementing tool and team on the ground which supports artisanal miners in achieving better social and environmental practices. So it's the PPP, the private-public partnership, that is we implementing together along with the SECO.
And certainly, given your success and longevity in the space, it's clear that that combination of private as well as government has been quite valuable. I wanted to ask a little bit about your particular approach on ASM and how you would describe it.
Yeah. So it is true that the combination between the collaboration between public and private sector is very important, and certainly it also one of the reasons of the longevity that you mentioned and the scalability that we are now achieving, because not only this is about international cooperation and development, but it is also about ASM inclusion into the supply chains of private businesses. So we really wanted to do something which is much further than the development initiative, that once the ASM producers have reached the eligibility criteria of the market, that this gold has an added value in the market. Yes. So that the day that the development program is plugged out, is pulled out, that this continues because the producers, they have a say in the supply chain. Instead of being a producer, they become a supplier. There is a direct relationship with the buyers of the gold. So that was very important. And then also what the Confederation is helping us a lot is in terms of policy dialogue, which is very important in really passing the message about the different challenges of ASM environment, the process of formalization, the way, the facilitation of experts for them, accessing financial mechanisms, etc. So in all of that, the SECO, our SECO interlocutors are really of a key support to the initiative.
I think that's so wonderful to hear, and certainly for LBMA, we've been very conscious since we put mandatory standards in place for our refiners. It's actually become more difficult for legitimate but informal players to access the market. And unfortunately, so many took the approach of saying, well, the easiest way to reduce my risk is to just boycott or say no, and that's what we don't want to see that. So we're really keen to understand sort of the magic behind Swiss Better Gold and what's really happened. And it sounds like the involvement of government, but also the commitment of the private to purchase the material has been important.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. So what we really tried to do is to develop a program, or we call it a continuous improvement approach, an escalator approach, because together with our members, we defined what are their expectations as a downstream in order for this gold to become eligible for their timepieces, for their products. We said, okay, what are the key criteria that you need to be fulfilled, and what is the full list of criteria that you need to feel comfortable and buy this gold? And this is how we came with this escalator approach. So there is a first step with what we call the basic criteria. Sure. When the mines, they have to fulfill a certain number of expectations of the market, which is already, they accept the idea that this is not perfect, but it is in process. So, and that gives some kind of motivation to the miners to keep climbing the escalator. Because at this step, at this early step, already their gold is being exported, and that is key for them because they can't keep waiting until all the criteria are fulfilled. Absolutely. So they have already access there, and that is a motivation. And secondly, they receive the technical assistance of our people on the ground in order to fulfill the next level of criteria and expectations of the downstream. So if in the first instance we were looking at basic criteria, here we look at our full list of criteria, which include, for example, community relations, cyanide management, climate change since a year now, etc. So, and when they reach that level, not only they can export, but also they can receive the impact premium. So there are different mechanisms, different motivation factors to keep climbing the escalator. And we think that that approach was really helpful in growing the initiative.
Okay, so in terms of the involvement of industry, and your members cover the full value chain, which I think is important, but what sort of obstacles have they faced on that escalator in terms of getting things going? Because I'm sure it hasn't been as smooth as perhaps we would hope it to continue to be, but and any messages for people looking to get on the escalator or trying to understand what the challenges are out there?
Of course, ASM, a lot of challenges, of course, and on both sides actually. There are challenges related to the operation, the size of operation, the level of formalization of the operation itself, and the difficulties they have in completing those legal requirements, environmental requirements, social requirements. But also from the downstream, there is sometimes a mismatch, I would say, in expectations, because where is ASM and where is the downstream? So, and I think making that bridge, this is really important because somehow we really have to narrow a little bit the gap and make one side and other side understand what are their respective expectations in terms of from the downstream. It will be the due diligence, the KYC, etc. So, and imagine when these expectations reach the miners, how complex this may look for them.
Intimidating.
Yes. So for them, whose reality is that a simple access to opening a bank account is a challenge.
Absolutely.
So, and therefore, we really have to bring these two things together. There is kind of the rule of proportionality, which is to be somehow shortened, because the downstream, the members we have are institutional members, big companies, and then you have on the other side small producers of 2-5 kilos a month. So shortening that is a challenge, definitely. So so understanding each other, speaking the same language, and giving, I think, the time to time. because we really need time to work on the mine site and improve the processes, and also to work with the downstream so that they also understand what it is, ASM, and what are the challenges of ASM, and be patient, because responsible gold doesn't happen like over the day.
It's development.
It's a development. So, and we are really happy to have our members with that level kind of maturity to the ASM, that they are patient and they engage with our producers at step one in order to illustrate them that we are there to accompany. We are there to build this supply chain together. It's not that we just come in when the gold is already eligible and perfect. It is this process that, and that I think altogether helps us.
So it sounds like commitment to the full journey, and obviously communication and education as to the challenges at both ends of the spectrum.
Yes, absolutely. Joint missions typically. So the end users of this gold, the supply chain members, they travel usually with us to see, to know their minds, and that we are about short supply chain, so we need that connection.
Well, and you mentioned the team on the ground. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I understand certainly Swiss Better Gold in terms of on the ground, but also what's the government involvement, would you say, on the ground?
So we are now working in 4 countries. We started in Peru, then we extended 4 years later to Colombia and Bolivia. And since last year, we also have supply chains, pilot supply chains from Brazil. So in terms of teams, we have local teams, our implementing partners, who are usually from the country, the people who know the mining environment of each country. So mining engineers, geologists, people who studied social sciences, but in Colombia these are about Colombians, and Peru about Peruvians. And in each country we have about 5 to 10 people deploying our tools on the ground, let's say. So they are delivering the different trainings, they are establishing the gap analysis between the step 1 and step 2, and establishing the work plan for the mines, how they should fulfill those expectations and close the gaps. So there is a very close relationship. So the mines are visited every 3 months, so to see what progresses they made in between, you know. So really we know each producer. And then and the same team is also helping and supporting us in what I call the policy dialogue. So they are also engaged with local interlocutors from the Ministry of Energy and Mines, Ministry of Environment, Department of Formalization, so that they know where we are about, what are our challenges, and so that we try to support each other in making this possible.
Excellent. So it's sort of the practical situation on the ground as well as the policy that has to support it. And I could see the important role that 𝐒𝐿 would play in that as well. I think, you know, there's a lot of folks want to know in terms of government's involvement, and maybe government gets worried too, because, you know, I think getting funding is difficult, and particularly now, I think there's a challenge in terms of where money should be spent. But I also understand for Swiss Better Gold, the funding, there's initial support, but that has tapered off now from the government?
So yeah, from the very beginning, the idea was that 𝐒𝐿 supports us to kick off with this initiative, and that on the longer term, we fully take the responsibility of our operations on the ground. So, and this slowly is gradually it's of course it's not a immediate pull out, but gradually we are preparing the ground for that to happen. And normally we will be doing that over the next phase. So we work in phases with 𝐒𝐿, the third phase being signed until 2025. And from there on, we will be gradually taking over all our operations activities.
Which, you know, I think is so crucial in terms of giving you the runway for success. I mean, if you're in a feast and famine from a funding perspective, I know from my own trustee work on charities, this can be really exhausting for the executive team. So it's good to have that runway, But I would also say from the business perspective, it keeps you grounded in terms of this has to eventually be able to self-sustain. You know, the model has to work from a business perspective. So I would say actually from industry as well as government, there's a united goal there, but also the recognition that these things take time.
Yes, and this is exactly the reason why we really wanted the financing mechanism to be sustainable. And if I take the term of the watch industry, it's the self-winding mechanism. The more you move, the more you generate, you know, energy. So 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐭 has supported us, as I was saying, for the initial phases, and now, well, we have the system of premium, the impact premium, and that specifically to be self-sustainable over time, there is the premium we generate, there is part which goes back to the mines which are fulfilling the step 2 expectations. Part of this premium is reinvested in the technical assistance of those mines at the first step of the escalator. So, and that was our private sector response, let's say, to be self-sustainable over time, because we think that if we generate that impact premium today, we should think of reinvesting that in technical assistance and the grooming activities, let's say, on step 1 of escalator, so there is always sufficient mines climbing the escalator.
Well, that's really interesting from the scalability. So it's that commitment, but it's a commitment not just to the journey of the gold from, let's say, from rock to watch, but it's also to get more coming through the pipeline continuously. You want the continuous production.
Exactly. So, and that allows us now, with the first 2 phases behind us, to project and to plan for further growth. So from an initiative of 23 kilos export of first year, we have reached 3 tons a year now. Also thanks to that mechanism, partly, yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, I mean, I think from our side, you know, if I switch gears for a little bit in terms of climate, it is part of the sustainability. Responsible sourcing is certainly part of the sustainability agenda. But what is Swiss Better Gold doing with regards to climate? What are you looking at, and what do you see as opportunities and challenges?
It is true that we have included as one of the criteria of the second step of the escalator, climate change. And we really want to work with our network of mines and with our members on that element. And we are, for that, we start looking at what is the perception of contribution into climate change from the extractive gold mining, and we understood that there was no very specific ASM study on emissions, on carbon emissions from ASM mines. And this is why we are now conducting a study which will be released in May, hopefully, and I will share, of course, the results with you. So we will conduct that study, but we are conducting that study, but already the preliminary results already indicate us that there are about 3,000 to 4,000 kilos of CO2 emissions per kilo of gold in our sector. Comparatively, large-scale mining is generating apparently 13,000 of emissions per kilo of gold. And recycled is usually claimed at 100 kilos. So we do see a trend indeed that downstream is moving towards recycled, because one of the reasons being the low emission factor. However, well, firstly, there is no enough of recycled gold for all the market. We can't avoid going into artisanal, which is still contributing almost 20%. So it's a lot, and we cannot we can build the market without that contribution. Today we still need it. And in terms of emissions, we see that finally ASM is not that badly ranked in terms of emissions, and that at the beginning we were a bit afraid that we will have a harder times also to seduce buyers to buy ASM gold. But finally we think that it will be an advantage actually because we will have those results, so that those I articulated to you are preliminary, it's not final, but this is what we are heading towards. And we think definitely there is a good reason to buy ASM Gold. And also, last but not least, the results of that study will give us a very specific list of activities we can undertake with our mines in order to further reduce those emissions. And which is good in per se, that we will be reducing those emissions in our operations, but also these operations are suppliers of our downstream partners. Therefore, we will be reducing the Scope 3 emissions of our members. So it's a win-win situation.
Excellent. Well, I think very interested to catch up with you when you have those results, but it's very encouraging from the preliminary results and already starting to challenge what I think most people's assumptions would be, because you think mining, it's going to have a bigger footprint. But to be able to say, actually, ASM, it's very different, it's lower. So not only are you making a responsible choice to help the society on the ground, but you're also having a positive impact in terms of carbon. So we await the formal results and the recommendations, but I think it's very exciting, Diana.
Thank you very much, and it will be my pleasure to share the results with you in October, I think.
Yes, well, so we have LBMA conference 16th through 18th October, and certainly we'll be reconvening on sustainability. But also for LBMA, we're very keen to see more ASM coming into the formal supply chains, and that it should become a halo effect if you are sourcing this material, because in a responsible way, of course, because of the real impact it has to the 40.5 million ASM miners and their families who rely on this. It's so important.
Absolutely. We will be there. We're happy to contribute to that dialogue and happy to bring the results in order to bring more appetite for ASM, definitely.
Excellent. Well, please keep us posted. And I really want to say thank you for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and see the team here in Geneva, and hopefully catch up online soon and in person again in October.
Thank you very much, Ruth.